Hey, it's Jordan, and I am here with Jonathan Sokolow. You are an attorney, an activist, as well as a a writer too, and a I'd say you've been doing more media coverage yourself as an activist than most of the national media has on both the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. I wanted to ask you, I've been to Virginia. I covered both of these a couple months ago. There's conflicting stories. You see some stories that say pipeline has been halted, whereas other stories say certain sections of the pipeline can't have construction, but other sections can. So for both the Mountain Valley Pipeline as well as the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, both of which go through Virginia as well as West Virginia, I believe. Where are we at as far as construction, permit denial, and all that?
Okay, I can cover that, Jordan. First of all, thank you very much for having me. For those of you who don't know, Jordan was down here in April when things got hot in Virginia. We had a bunch of tree sitters who were blocking the pathway to the Mountain Valley Pipeline, the tree cutting that they were trying to do. Jordan was down here on the spot doing fantastic reporting. So we really appreciate that from all the folks in Virginia, and I do appreciate this opportunity to talk to your audience and update on what's happening. It is confusing what's going on. There are conflicting narratives. Let me try to, and you're quite right, the corporate media has not been covering it, so we've been filling in the holes to make sure people are aware. So let me try to break it down. There are two pipelines that are proposed for this area, Southwest United States. The major pipeline is
I don't have any places to show.
The major pipeline is called the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which is a joint project from Dominion Energy, which is the largest, monopoly utility in Virginia, partnered with Duke Energy in North Carolina. It's a 600-mile pipeline that would bring fracked methane gas from West Virginia through North Carolina, or through Virginia rather, into North Carolina. The smaller pipeline is a 300-mile pipeline called the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which would likewise start in West Virginia and go through Virginia, and there's talk of it going to North Carolina at some future date. That's being built by a company called EQT out of Pittsburgh. So the status on both of those, if I can just summarize it, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline has been stopped dead in its tracks for now. There's been a lot of activity at the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, as well as with the Army Corps of Engineers. Last week, in a ruling, the Fourth Circuit threw out some permits that the Atlantic Coast Pipeline had, which had to do with coverage for endangered species. And as a result of that, Dominion Energy, quote, voluntarily, unquote, suspended construction along the entire 600-mile route of the pipeline. They had not done much work they hadn't done any work in Virginia or North Carolina on pipeline construction, nor do I believe had they started pipeline construction in West Virginia, but they did start tree clearing in all three states. That's all come to a halt. Dominion says it's going to go back to the Fourth Circuit for what they call clarification, which is a polite way of saying they want the Fourth Circuit to change the opinion, the unanimous opinion they came out with, or the unanimous order they came out with last week. That's the case there, not to get too technical, but it's a stay pending appeal. In other words, the court is going to hear that challenge, which is one of many challenges to the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, in January, and decide the case thereafter. And the court last week said, while that case is pending, these permits are thrown out. So the Atlantic Coast Pipeline has been stopped for now. The Mountain Valley Pipeline is in a similar situation. There have been rulings. They've lost what's called Nationwide Permit 12, which is the permit that allows them to construct along the entire route. There's been a lot of fighting as to whether they should be allowed, as they want. Mountain Valley wants to operate under a national permit, or whether they need to get a permit for each of the hundreds of stream and wetland crossings that they have to do in the states. The nationwide permit has been thrown out again for now, so construction on the Mountain Valley Pipeline as to well, it's a little. There's one level further of analysis on there. Construction for the Mountain Valley Pipeline has been stopped for streams and river crossings, but there's nothing, and that should result, as the law is written, in suspension of the entire construction. But we would need an order from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to do that, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, controlled by Donald Trump at this point, is sitting on that. So the Mountain Valley Pipeline is continuing with construction along the 300-mile route in areas that are not stream crossings or river crossings or wetlands. So they're sort of in a little bit of a different situation than the Atlantic Coast Pipeline at this point.
And I want to humanize this for the audience, because they might say, well, what about these two pipelines is different than the gazillion other pipelines being forced through America? Number one, as far as the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which is the bigger one, I visited a church in Union Hill, Virginia, and that church, literally next to the church, has freedmen buried, there, freed slaves from, 2 centuries ago. And this is a predominantly black community, historic community, and essentially the compressor station, which is a massive, going to be, I think, the only compressor station for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline in Virginia, is basically being built in the backyard, essentially, of this church. And it's going to be emitting, everything from methane to other toxins into this historic community, contaminating the air. These are a lot of senior citizens that live here, majority black. There was some, I would say, fudgery that went on as far as the energy company calculating how many people actually live there. They did some creative math, and I interviewed both residents there inside the church as well as activists. And this has it hasn't gotten enough coverage, but a little more coverage as far as the media. This is environmental racism on steroids. Can you tell me about, I know there's deadlines coming up for decisions on whether this compressor station could be built in Union Hill?
Yes, absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up. Union Hill is a microcosm of everything that's wrong with environmental justice in this country, and everything that's wrong with political corruption in Virginia. As you correctly point out, Union Hill is a historic community founded by freed slaves after the Civil War. There's 2 historic African American Baptist churches within a mile of the proposed compressor station. You need a compressor station to compress and put under high pressure the methane that's going through the pipes. They normally put these compressor stations every 50 to 70 miles. In the case of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, they've decided to build this massive 54,000 horsepower compressor station to deal with about 400 miles of pipeline. It's a 42-inch pipeline. It's unprecedented, the amount of methane that's going to be pumped through this and the pressure that's going to be put on. And they just happened to pick a poor, rural African-American community founded by freed slaves. The story of Union Hill could not be more outrageous. They bought the land to build this compressor station from a group called Variety Shades landowners, which are the descendants of the Variety Shade tobacco plantation that employed the ancestors of the freedmen, of the ancestors of the people who founded Union Hill. 65-acre site. They paid 10 times the going price for this to buy the land for this compressor station. Dominion tried to fudge the numbers, as you said. They're still trying to fudge the numbers. They submitted some census data to the state regulatory board a couple of weeks ago, saying this isn't a majority African American community, and it's just an outright lie. They try to play with they try to ignore the households that are there. There's actually drone photography video that's been produced just to refute. They say there's X number of houses within compressor station site. They just lied. It's an 80% minority, 83% minority community, largely African American as well as Hispanic as Native American, but it's predominantly African American. As you point out, there's freedmen burial sites, there's cemetery, there's unmarked graves. And this compressor station would run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They would have blowdown events that sound like a 747 jet engine in your backyard. This is an elderly population predominantly. It's going to spew methane, particulate matter, benzene, exacerbate conditions for anybody with asthma, cancer-causing substances, all for a pipeline that's not needed. And the reason it's gotten this far along is because Dominion Energy has contributed $14 million over the past few years to politicians in both parties. They've effectively bought them off, and they're still trying to buy people off. They're trying to buy off people in Union Hill with cash, basically.
And not to interrupt, but just to point out the current governor elected last year, Ralph Northam. I don't know how much he's taken recently, but overall, he's taken about $200,000 from Dominion Energy, a lot of which came during his run for governor. He was elected governor last year, and he ran as an environmentalist, and a lot of the platitudes that you hear from national Democrats about climate change and we got to shift to renewables and clean energy. Well, he's taken $200,000 from this very energy company.
Yes, no, that's absolutely right. And the best way to think of Virginia when you're talking about the Union Hill, the fight to save Union Hill, is Virginia is a banana republic that's controlled by Dominion Energy. And if I can just tell you this story, which gets to the heart of this matter. In order to build this compressor station, Dominion needs a permit from a state regulatory board, a citizen board called the Virginia Air Pollution Control Board. That board had a public comment period over the summer in which thousands of people submitted comments on the proposed compressor station. The majority of the comments were against the compressor station based on environmental racism, based on lack of need for this pipeline, and based on concern for the community. The Air Board had a public hearing on November 8th to 9th. There are 7 members of the board, but 1 member recused themselves. So there were 6 members. And I went to that hearing on both days. And there were about 500 people in attendance. We submitted further public comments. There was discussion from the board members. And at the end of that meeting, it was absolutely clear to everyone that the vote of the 6 members of the board was going to be at least a 3-3 tie, possibly a 4-2 vote against the compressor station. A 3-3 tie would have been a defeat because they need a majority to approve it. So we were on the cusp of stopping the compressor station on November 8th and 9th. They broke for lunch before their vote. And when they came back after lunch, one of the members of the board made a motion to adjourn and delay the vote until December the 10th. They approved that motion and they left the room. 6 days.
What reason was given to adjourn?
Well, the member who made the motion said there's a lot of controversy over this. There's a lot of confusing facts. We need more time to discuss it. We need more census data to get at the heart of what this community really is. So I think it would be a good idea to just adjourn and give everybody time to cool their jets and think about it. The meeting was adjourned. 6 days later, Ralph Northam fired 2 of the board members who publicly at that meeting challenged Dominion on the question of environmental racism and challenged Dominion on the need for this pipeline. Just dismissed them. And the reason he gave was, well, their terms expired back in June. The Richmond Times-Dispatch was able to expose the fact that there are 250 members of various boards in Virginia who are sitting now with expired terms. And typically these members serve until new people are appointed. But Ralph Northam chose these 2 particular members to fire. The next day, and this was 6 days after they publicly had announced their views, the next day he appointed 2 new members who nobody in the environmental community had ever heard of them. One of those members has done consulting work for a pipeline company. The story exploded in the media, at which point Ralph Northam made a public statement that he understood the concerns and therefore those 2 new members will not vote. So we were in limbo for a few days. They will not vote on the December 10th permit application. We were in limbo for a few days as to what was going to happen, because lawyers pointed out that until new members are sworn in, the old members are still serving. Mm-hmm. So these two old members could actually show up, and the meeting was scheduled for December the 10th, yesterday. These two new members could show up. Late Friday afternoon, Ralph Northam swore in the two new members, who he had said were not going to be allowed to vote on the permit. So the only reason to swear in the two new members was to prevent the two old members from voting to defeat the permit. So that's where things stood on Friday. Yesterday, we had a lot of snow in Virginia. The meeting was canceled and has been rescheduled to December the 19th, with a 4-member board, only one of whom has publicly labeled this as environmental racism. We don't know how the vote's going to come out. What we do know is that Dominion used Ralph Northam to rig the vote. And the reason we know that is not just for the reasons I've cited, but a couple of days after the meeting, activists caught Tom Farrell, who's the CEO of Dominion, coming out of a secret meeting with Governor Northam that was not on his schedule, that was not publicly announced, that they hadn't told anybody about it. But we caught video of him coming out of the meeting along with David Paler, who's the head of the Department of Environmental Quality, which oversees the air board. So the fix is in. And we're talking about a Democratic governor who claims to be an environmentalist, but what he really is greenwashing with small initiatives and trying to divert attention from what we have here, which are two pipelines that represent at this point $12 billion of investment in fracked methane gas for projects that are going to destroy Union Hill and the local communities through which the pipelines would run.
And there's so many different elements to peeling this onion of corruption.
Yes.
So first and foremost, if one of the board members has recused him or herself, and now that leaves 3 in play, and one is publicly calling this environmental racism, but the other 2, you had said, seem to be more for the compressor station, then that would be a majority, correct?
So yes. So there's four members who are left. We're pretty certain from just the way the meeting went that 2 of those members are probably going to vote for the compressor station. 1 is probably going to vote against the compressor station, and then the 4th one is unknown. Although and if she were to vote against the compressor station, it would be defeated. The problem is she's the one who made the motion to delay and adjourn the meeting on November the 9th.
I see.
So there's some concern, I guess I would call it, that she was in on the fix. We're hoping not, but what we're trying to do is to build public pressure and national movement to shine light on what really is as I said at the beginning, a banana republic style attempt to rig the vote.
And I want to, in addition to Union Hill, just the geography of especially Mountain Valley Pipeline, but Atlantic Coast as well. It's going through some of the steepest terrain in the country. You have a lot of parts of the Appalachian Trail, which is a historic, beautiful terrain. I mean, this on top of, I've covered pipelines in Texas that were going through the Big Bend region. I mean, just the actual act of building the pipeline in these steep terrains is shifting things. We've seen already, I believe, mudslides caused by the building of the pipeline. We have, I interviewed a mother and daughter who were tree sitters for over a month. A lot of land is being seized via eminent domain. But could you kind of talk about the danger specifically and how this is being built and where it's being built through?
Yes, absolutely. No, you're quite right, Jordan. So they have to get this pipeline from West Virginia into Virginia, and they've got to cross the Appalachian Trail, the Appalachian Mountains. In some places, the path of the pipelines for both of them have grades of 70 or 80%. So they're literally going to build pipe going almost vertical through very unstable terrain. There's a lot of karst, which is porous limestone, which they would have to blast. And when they do blast that, if they do, it's going to affect the underground aquifer for hundreds of thousands of people. And water water moves. So if you blow up karst in one place and you've got porous ground for miles and miles underneath, it gets into people's wells, it gets into people's springs. Um, we've been telling them this for 4 years, but they don't have to take our word for it anymore because it's already happened. Last week, the Attorney General of Virginia, Mark Herring, filed a lawsuit alleging 300 different violations by the Mountain Valley Pipeline. All that damage that you saw and you were hearing about in April, Mark Herring has now filed a lawsuit to hold the company accountable for the damage that's been done. Just yesterday, the chairwoman of the Board of Supervisors in Albemarle County, which is in Charlottesville, which is not on the path of the pipeline, but has been given several $1,000,000 as a what effectively is a bribe to stay silent. They were given some money out of a slush fund that was created by the former governor, Terry McAuliffe, and we can talk about that, to improve a park in Charlottesville. The chairwoman of the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors said that she was uncomfortable with this kind of payoff, and the reason she said she was uncomfortable is what she called, quote, the atrocities that have happened to the land and the landowners in the path of these pipelines. So the governor doesn't have to take our word for it anymore. An elected official of his own party has called what's happened an atrocity. The Attorney General of the state of the Commonwealth of Virginia has filed a lawsuit. And they've only just started. Most of the construction for the Mountain Valley Pipeline has not been done. Very little of the construction for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline has been done. And they've got to go through this mountainous terrain. It's gonna create a lot more damage, and the damage that you're referring to is rampant. Mudslides, sediment getting into the water. The city of Roanoke has 250,000 people in that area, in Roanoke and the surrounding area, that drink the water. The pipes that feed the reservoir that gives water to that population are going to be clogged up because of the sediment that's getting is getting into the water supply, and will get into the water supply. And it's not just Southwest Virginia, because all of this water ends up in the Chesapeake Bay. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about sedimentation that's going to affect aquatic marine life. We're talking about sedimentation that's going to affect the economy, people's livelihood, oyster farmers, and fishermen, and the rest, tourism. It just has a total cascading effect of the damage that will be done to people's lives, to people's water, to people's property values, to people's businesses, and it's got to stop.
Not to mention the deforestation. I mean, I was on the property of the Terrys, who were the mother and daughter who really got some national attention initially for climbing up in their trees to stop these trees from being cut down on their land. People lose sight of it's these homeowners' land that they own. A lot of it passed through generations, family heirlooms, that they've basically cut down large portions of 100 trees that are 100-year-old trees, and the destruction. I mean, just sitting there watching it, it's very symbolic of kind of the bribes you're talking about. I mean, all of this for pipelines that, to point out, correct me on the numbers if I'm wrong, Virginia's existing pipelines are only at half capacity. So there really is no need for these two new pipelines.
That's correct. The existing pipelines, I think the figure is 54% capacity. So there's a lot more capacity. And again, people don't have to take the activist word for it. When the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission approved both of these pipelines, and they over the years, over the decades, not only approve every project that comes before them, but approve them unanimously. There was a vocal dissent by Cheryl LaFleur, who was a member, still is a member of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and she issued an opinion in which she said there is no demonstration of public need for either the Mountain Valley or the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And the way that the FERC process is set up is they can demonstrate need by showing that they've sold the gas to another entity. So what both Dominion and the Mountain Valley Pipeline Company, EQT, did is they formed affiliates that they owned and controlled and signed an agreement with them and said, here's the need for the gas. We've signed an agreement to sell it to ourselves.
Shell companies.
Yes, absolutely, shell companies. So, and they're called affiliate agreements. And in Cheryl LaFleur's dissent, she pointed out, she said, this has got to stop. We can't let these companies manufacture a need when no need exists. So, and she said there's been no demonstrated public need for this, which is a legal requirement to approve projects of this nature. You referred to the Terry, so this was Red and Minor Terry, who went up in trees in April, stayed there for 30-some days on their own land. Just to give people a sense of how this project, this whole fight resembles, a George Orwell novel. When they came down from the trees, they were charged with trespassing on their own land. Mm-hmm. And the criminal charges that were brought against both of them alleged that the pipeline company, even though they didn't own the land, owned an easement on the land, and they were interfering with the pipeline company's right to cut down the trees on the land that the Terrys owned. There was a mass movement that developed to support both of them, and just several weeks ago, both Red and Minor Terry went to trial and were acquitted of all charges. So justice was finally done in that case. But after many months of struggle, a lot of legal expenses for the Terrys, and it just shouldn't have happened. But this is what's happening in Virginia. Virginia is ground zero right now for environmental justice, for the fight to stop climate change, for the fight to expose how political corruption and campaign contributions is not only corrupting our regulatory process, but is endangering our planet. Mm-hmm. The statistics for these two pipelines show that they would be the equivalent. They would produce the equivalent of 46 coal-fired plants in terms of greenhouse gases. And there's this lie that was sold to the public 20 years ago about natural gas being, first of all, being natural gas. The whole naming of it. We're talking about gas, a fossil fuel that's about 90% or 95% methane. So we don't call it natural gas. We call it, natural gas is like something you'd buy at, Whole Foods. Mm-hmm. This is fracked methane, which is destructive to the environment from beginning to end. From the moment it's fracked out of the ground and the chemicals are pumped into the ground, and the earthquakes that are caused by it, to the end use, which is to burn the methane. It's not a bridge fuel. We need investments in wind, solar, other alternative energy. But it's not happening in Virginia because of the power of Dominion Energy. They announced recently that they were going to make a huge commitment to wind power, and to prove it, they were going to build 2 wind turbines off the coast of Virginia as a test to just see if it works. Mm-hmm. That's what we're dealing with in Virginia. That kind of greenwashing, where they do small projects to make it seem to the public and to the Democratic Party base, which is strongly pro-environment, that they're doing something, but in fact they're doing great damage to the environment.
And I want to talk so the audience understands, because it's not just in Virginia, but just FERC in general, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. When you talk about banana republics, I mean, FERC literally has the energy companies do the assessments, do the environmental assessments. So essentially, FERC is outsourcing environmental assessments and the costs for those to like Dominion Energy, EQT, these companies who 9 times out of 10, actually 10 times out of 10, they're assessing themselves and, oh, well, this won't actually cause any damage to the water or the wildlife or residences. Shocker. The other thing is, for these pipelines, wasn't there a deal made where FERC was giving these companies like a 14% automatic return on investment?
Yeah, they're guaranteed a 14% return on investment. So
by FERC,
by FERC. That's exactly right. So just to think about this for a second, because everything that you've just said and I've just said really encapsulates what's going on here. They are building a pipeline without a demonstration of public need by signing agreements with themselves to sell themselves gas that is not needed, for pipelines that are not needed, and they don't care whether it's ever sold or used or put online. For every dollar they put in, they get 14 cents back, $1.14. So it's all about getting it done quickly, getting the pipe in the ground, getting it, getting all the approvals so they can get a return for their shareholders. Dominion Energy, Duke Energy, these are publicly traded corporations. They don't answer to anybody but their shareholders, and it's all about profit. So the name of the game here for the pipeline companies is to create an aura of inevitability that these are going to happen. Don't fight it. You can't win, and get it done as quickly as possible before the courts and direct action stop them. And the name of the game on our side is to fight them in the trees, in the streets, in the political arena, in the court of public opinion. We're getting national attention at this point. Obviously, your show here is helping to do that. We had a lead story on NBCNews.com last week, which talked about the scandal at the Air Board and the whole fight against these pipelines. We've got the Hip Hop Caucus. We've got the NAACP in Virginia, and nationally, we have the governor's own advisory council on environmental justice. These are 15 people appointed by the governor to advise him on environmental justice in Virginia, and they came out with a report a couple of months ago in August saying that these pipelines should not be built, neither the Mountain Valley nor the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and calling what was happening at Union Hill a case of environmental racism. The governor's own advisory council. So people are starting to hear about this. We have celebrities involved. We had a letter that was circulated last week, organized by Karenna Gore, who's an environmental activist in her own right, very well respected, as well as the daughter of Al Gore, who everybody knows. Ed Begley Jr. signed that. Don Cheadle signed that. A lot of people from the acting community, a lot of activists around the country signed it. The Hip Hop Caucus is involved. So the word is definitely getting out, and it's important. It's an opportunity for people who are concerned about environmental justice, for the Sunrise Movement, for people to get involved. Virginia in 2019 is having an off-year election. Virginia elections are always off-year. And in 2019, it is the only major election taking place anywhere in the United States. And the Democrats have a chance to flip both houses of this House of Delegates as well as the state Senate. The Democrats are down one vote in both of those. It's 51-49 in the House of Delegates, and it's, I believe, 21-19 in the Senate. So this is an opportunity in Virginia for anybody who's concerned about the environment to get involved in Union Hill. The movement is going under the hashtag We Are All Union Hill on Twitter. If people want to have an impact, Virginia's the place to do it, because Democrats are going to have to make a choice in Virginia, as well as they have to make a choice nationally, and the environmental movement is putting them on the spot. It's not good enough now to just check the boxes and say you drive a Prius and you believe in recycling plastic bags. We're talking about climate change. We're talking about environmental racism. And if we can put a national spotlight on what is happening in Virginia as Virginia moves into this 2019 important election, it's going to force the Democratic Party of Virginia to choose, and the choice is very simple. Which side are you on? Mm-hmm. Are you on the side of the people who bought plantation land from the plantation owner descendants to destroy a largely African-American community, or are you on the side of environmental justice? Do you believe when the UN says that we have 12 years to avert climate catastrophe? Do you believe that? And are you going to do something about it, or are you going to allow $12 billion in new fracked methane pipelines in Virginia? It's a simple choice, and they're either going to answer to their corporate masters or they're going to answer to the people, and they're not going to make the right choice unless we force them to make the right choice. So we need everybody's help. This is an all hands on deck time, and we in Virginia really could use the help of national voices to get this message out there.
And that's a good segue. And I know we could do 3 hours on Terry McAuliffe and Northam, so I'll try to condense it. But, you know, I think nationally, and we heard in the midterms, we just got to elect the Democrats. We just got to elect the Democrats. And certainly, you're not going to, I mean, what you're describing, you would think, is what Republicans do. I mean, they're doing, you know, Republicans in Louisiana with the Bayou Bridge Pipeline and Republicans in Texas. Basically a mafia system where all the legislature, the governor, all the way down to, you know, city council are all bought off by big oil and fossil fuel companies. But you're seeing, I mean, Terry McAuliffe, who people nationally might know, he was the governor of Virginia, but very connected to the Clintons, did a lot of fundraising for both Bill and Hillary Clinton's various campaigns. He was as he was exiting after his term was up, he basically made this, you know, borrowing from my dearly departed grandma, fakakta corrupt deal to, as far as I know, like allow these companies to put a cap on how much they would owe from damage done by these pipelines. He, in very back rooms kind of deals, made deals for, I think it was tens of millions of dollars, capped out, that essentially these companies are going to be getting away, possibly with murder, and are capped out. I think it was at like 58 million, if I'm correct.
That's correct.
And Ralph Northam, obviously we've talked about him. So essentially, whether it's in Virginia or elsewhere, are we at a point where it's a litmus test? Are candidates taking money from these companies, and will Virginians or anyone vote for them if they are taking money from the very companies that, as we're talking about here, are basically, they're running the government. The companies are running the government of Virginia, not Ralph Northam.
That's absolutely right. I mean, we say in Virginia, governors come and go, but Dominion is always in charge, and that's how it is. We absolutely need candidates who refuse to take money from the fossil fuel industry. We absolutely need candidates who are going to push for a Green New Deal in Virginia and nationally. We need candidates who answer to the people, not answer to the fossil fuel company. The deals that you're talking about, again, are a microcosm of everything that's wrong in Virginia politics and politics nationally. Terry McAuliffe signed 3 secret deals in December, right before he left office, December of 2017. The election was in November, and then there was the, I guess, lame duck period, which turned out not to be so lame duck, where he was leaving in January. In the middle of that period, he signed agreements with Dominion Energy, which was a campaign contributor, to release them of all further liabilities for damage to the forest and damage to the water in Virginia for $58 million. And the story that I told earlier in this broadcast about the supervisor in Albemarle County saying she was disgusted about the pay-to-play aspect where money was given to Albemarle County to keep them quiet about the atrocities going on, that money came from that $58 million slush fund that Terry McAuliffe created in December of 2017. He created a similar series of agreements, 2 agreements, I believe, for the Mountain Valley Pipeline that were about $27 million. Same thing, with a full release of liabilities as to all of those, as to all of that damage. And the way that the deal was engineered, and I know this because I was the one who exposed these deals and published them on bluevirginia.us. If anybody wants to read the agreements and read the story about how they came to light, they can go to bluevirginia.us and just look for the articles that I've written, or look for articles about Terry McAuliffe and his sellout and his pay-to-play deals, and you'll find a series of articles. He signed these agreements in December. They were not made public. I found them and published them at the beginning of February, and then there was a big uproar here. I then did a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, under the state law to find out more about this deal, and was given some documents, but I was given no documents from the Terry McAuliffe period. I was given documents from when Ralph Northam had come into office a few weeks earlier, which, as you can imagine, was nothing. And when I asked for the old documents, I was told, and there's been articles in the paper about this, that, oh, didn't you know when an old governor leaves office, his records are transferred to the Library of Virginia, and those records are not available until they're cataloged. So I called the head of the Library of Virginia and I said, when can we expect these records to be cataloged? And he actually told me, this is on the record, that they were still cataloging the records from Tim Kaine's administration. Tim Kaine was governor 10 years earlier. So you put all that together and you figure out Terry McAuliffe signed secret agreements, and he deliberately waited until weeks before he left office and then kept them secret because he knows better than anybody that would bury all the records of exactly how this corrupt payoff was made. And I don't use the word corrupt lightly because similar agreements, actually, they weren't even as bad, but they were similar in many respects, and for the same $58 million were signed in North Carolina. And in North Carolina, the governor of North Carolina is being investigated for corruption for having created that fund. The politics in North Carolina are a bit different because the move to hold the governor accountable is being done by the Republican legislature, which obviously has its own motives. But they're right. It was a corrupt deal, and the deal in Virginia is equally, if not more, corrupt. But this is what these politicians are doing. This is what Terry McAuliffe is doing. He's widely rumored to be planned to run for president. He's going to sell himself as an environmentalist. People shouldn't buy it. And they shouldn't buy it because he was the leading cheerleader and still is a leading cheerleader for both of these $12 billion frac methane pipelines.
And, you know, it's really interesting because as you were talking about this, you, who's an attorney, which is obviously, in its own right, takes a lot of research and looking up statutes and all that, but you seem to have done more work than most of the local media in Virginia. There's been some coverage. If I want to know an update, you know, I'll look at the Richmond Times and this. But as far as I can tell, they haven't done any of that deep dive investigative work that just a normal attorney slash activist slash writer did. I'm not saying that to toot you on the horn. I'm saying it because part of the reason that these secret deals happen, part of the reason where you have monopolies like Dominion, and there's Dominion-like companies in other states, is because you really don't have local or national media holding government officials accountable or looking into these corporations, which, by the way, a lot of these media companies get advertising or sponsorship deals from the very fossil fuel companies that they're supposed to be holding accountable. So it's much bigger than just the governmental corruption. The media, if at the most, the media might cover the Union Hill movement, might cover the No MVP movement and what activists are doing, but they're not exactly digging on these corporations. Am I wrong?
No, you're 100% right. And part of it, a little part of it is just understaffing the whole problem in you know, newspapers, print newspapers going on these days, which is why we rely on democratic platforms like yours and others to really get the word out. But the larger piece is the influence of Dominion. I'm not kidding when I say Virginia is a banana republic. The Richmond Times-Dispatch is a great example of it. They have a revolving door where their editorial page directors work for Dominion, then go to work for the editorial page, writing the editorials, and then go to work for Dominion afterwards. It's as bad as that. The spokesperson for Ralph Northam, a fellow named Brian Coy, left that job several months ago and went to work for a lobbying outfit that does lobbying for Dominion Energy. It's a revolving door of corruption in Virginia, in politics, in business, and in the media. We've had some breakthroughs with the corporate media. The Washington Post has done some good articles on the tree sits with Red Terry, some good articles on Union Hill. So we're starting to break through, but it's not because they want to. It's because we're forcing them to. As I said earlier, we're fighting this battle, and we're winning this battle in many respects, in the streets, in the trees, in the courts, and the word is getting out there. And the information is available. If people go to bluevirginia.us, which is the leading progressive blog in Virginia, it's all politics in Virginia, but there's been huge coverage. My friend Lowell Feld runs that blog and has for many years. There's many articles on the pipeline movement and climate change the fight against climate change generally. On Facebook, you can go to Virginians Against Pipelines. You can go to Appalachians Against Pipelines, which the latter one deals a lot with the direct action that's going on. So the information is out there; it's readily available. People just need to get it. They need to act on it. We need people to take individual action. We need people. If you're watching this broadcast and you're a member of any organization or have contacts with any organization anywhere in the United States or internationally, for that matter, you need to get them active on this. We need people to join the fight to save Union Hill. Few simple things. If I can just have some asks here. If you go to Twitter, the hashtag we are all Union Hill. We are all Union Hill on Twitter. Go there and start retweeting and adding other organizations and other individuals who you want to spread the message to. As I said, on Facebook, you can go to Virginians Against Pipelines and Appalachians Against Pipelines to get the information. Spread it on Facebook, spread it on Twitter. So those are simple things that when you're done watching this broadcast and you're outraged by the environmental racism in Virginia, you want to do something about climate change in Virginia as we lead the way fighting it. You can take those individual actions. But more importantly than that, if you can activate your organization, we need people to get organizations active. People can get their organizations involved. One thing to do is to start flooding the governor with phone calls and ask him, why did he purge the Air Pollution Control Board? Why is he allowing environmental racism to fester in Virginia? The governor's phone number is 804-786-2211. That's 804-786-2211. His office needs to be flooded with phone calls from all over the country. So we really need people to get involved. As I said, if you care about climate change, 2019 and 2018 are ground zero. Virginia's ground zero for that fight right now. And what we can do is, instead of being on the losing side of this fight, which is going to hurt all of us environmentally, we can be on the winning fight by building a broad coalition of people to take action.
And last question, I want to ask you more nationally, because I mean, as we speak, there's other Union Hills happening around the country, just in different
no question,
just in different forms. You have other governors, other Congress people making backroom deals with their donors from the fossil fuel companies. You have some, I mean, for example, the Trans-Pecos pipeline that I covered down in Texas. I mean, literally, the fossil fuel company lied on the forms in the beginning and didn't even say that it was going underground into Mexico. That came out later. I mean, it's literally a wild, wild west / banana republic, as you say. So what can people watching that might not be lawyers, might not be experts on all this, but who know there's a pipeline being talked about in their area, whether it's a pipeline, whether it's a nuclear power plant, uranium mining, whatever it is, what do you suggest people at the ground floor level do to activate their community while it's still early in the process, before permits are issued, and how do people kind of galvanize the local community? Because I do think we're seeing nationally with the Green New Deal movement, with this movement for a select committee and all these things, when more people are informed and there's more organizing, really the only way to stop politicians from doing wrong is to light an inferno up their behinds. I mean, let's face it, and to shame them publicly. So what do you recommend to people across the country, because there's pipelines being built in municipalities and cities all over the place?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. The first thing is, believe nothing that you're hearing. So the industry has a very clear strategy when it approaches any of this, and they've got millions of dollars of consultants and experts to advise them on this. Number one, they try to keep information as private as possible. They say it's proprietary, so they try to put a lid on the amount of information. Number two, when information starts to get out there, they say it's inevitable, it's going to happen, you can't fight it. So the first thing people need to do is believe none of that, and start doing their own research. Get on Google, there's resources out there with FERC. The companies need to file applications with FERC, so you can get on the FERC website, which I think is FERC.gov, and start typing in search terms that deal with your state, deal with your county, deal with your city, and try to find what you'd be looking for. In the case of FERC, is you'd be looking for an application from your local power company or your local utility to build a pipeline, and you can start to develop, a record, a body of evidence, a body of facts from that. It's getting maps of what they're proposing, where they're proposing to put it, how big it is, what kind it is, and just start poking around. Contact your, try to leverage your own power as an individual by contacting environmental groups with greater resources like the Sierra Club, and ask them what information they have, because they're plugged into databases where they can do quick searches and sort of do a shortcut for you to find out what's going on. But people just need to be active. Talk to your community. We'll see, sometimes things are discovered because people get a letter in the mail. In the case of Union Hill, that all started 4 years ago when one of the residents of Union Hill got a letter in the mail offering her $3,000 for an easement on her property to build something called a compressor station that she had never heard of. She got that letter. She went to her neighbors. They organized a movement. They got the church involved, and now we have a national movement to stop the compressor station in Union Hill. So talk to your neighbors, talk to people in your community, talk to the churches, your houses of worship. What have people heard about? Contact the National Sierra Club or contact your state chapter. But most of all, that whole process starts with not believing what you're being told, and not assuming that nothing is happening because you haven't heard about it. Right. Because their game plan is to keep things quiet as long as possible, and then once they're exposed, to say you can't fight us, and it's not true. We're proving it's not true every day in Virginia.
And I would definitely recommend, if you're interested in these two pipelines and kind of seeing how the sausage is made, people should follow you at John Socolow, because you're like a madman tweeting good things, but you tweet a lot. Actually, I find out more. I'm always direct messaging you with questions because I don't have the funding at the moment to be down there as much as I would like to. So I could keep up, but watching your Twitter is more informative to what's actually going on than any Virginia publication. So at John Socolow, and yeah, we'll stay in touch, because I think this is, to me, it's not just about Virginia. Obviously, the imminent threat is to Virginia, West Virginia, possibly North Carolina. But these monopolies, corruption is a generous word. This is essentially the sale, the legal sale of our government to corporations, and
Absolutely.
That is not what we hear in the narration of what America is, which is a shining democracy and all that. Well, it's not democratic. We're not voting for these corporations. We're voting for politicians, not to be in bed with the corporations, but to serve us. So I thank you for not just informing, but for fighting.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Jordan. I'll just say one last thing. It is happening all over the country, but sometimes a local fight has national ramifications. It wakes people up. The best example of that is probably what happened and what is still happening at Standing Rock. Mm-hmm. And there are many of us who think that Union Hill is Virginia's Standing Rock. In fact, the first article I wrote on Union Hill was called "Echoes of a Dark Past at Virginia's Standing Rock," which you can find on bluevirginia.us. You can also find on the Huffington Post. And it just tells the story, which is very much on the early side of what happened at Standing Rock on the latter end. But this is what we're dealing with a case of pure environmental racism. And it's just become worse as the months have gone by with the rigging of the airborne vote. So this is an opportunity, as I said before, for people to get involved in an issue in Virginia, which will have national implications and will help build the movement, which will eventually help save our planet and end the political corruption that's allowing climate change to proceed. Well, and thank you very much for having me, Jordan. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take care.
Okay.